Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab. Now let's begin. Marshall French stood at his workbench in the dim light of early morning, running his fingers along the grain of centuries-old walnut. The wood had come from a demolished estate in Vermont, rescued before it could be turned to ash. Now, it would become something beautiful again, a dining table for a family in Boston who understood the value of craftsmanship. At 42, Marshall had built his reputation on bringing dead things back to life. His daughter Emily appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 3. She was 9 now, with her mother's dark curls and serious gray eyes that seemed to carry too much weight for a child. "Dad, are you okay?" Marshall set down his tools and pulled her into a hug. "I'm perfect, kiddo. Just thinking about Mom." Emily's voice was small. She meant Sarah, Marshall's first wife, who died 4 years ago from an aneurysm that struck without warning. One moment she was laughing at the dinner table, the next she was gone. Sometimes, Marshall admitted, but mostly thinking about what I'm going to make you for breakfast. Pancakes or waffles? Pancakes, with chocolate chips. Emily smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Is Charlene coming to breakfast? The question landed like a stone. Charlene, Marshall's wife of 18 months, had been sleeping in the guest room for the past week. The official reason was that Marshall's workshop hours disturbed her sleep. The real reason was written in the increasing coldness between them, in the way she flinched when Emily called her name, in the hushed phone conversations with her mother that ended abruptly when Marshall entered a room. "Probably not, sweetheart. She has that charity thing with her mom today." Emily nodded, accepting this the way she'd learned to accept many things. Marshall hated that his daughter had developed such careful walls at 9 years old. The workshop occupied the converted carriage house behind their home in Riverside, Connecticut. The main house was a Victorian Marshall had restored himself, one of his first major projects after Sarah's death. It had been therapy, in a way, stripping away rot, revealing the beauty underneath, making something whole again. He'd met Charlene Day 2 years after Sarah died, at a charity auction where he'd donated a custom piece. She'd been magnetic that night, blonde, polished, charming. She'd seemed genuinely enchanted by Emily, had won her over with attention and gifts. The wedding happened quickly, too quickly perhaps, but Marshall had been ready to believe in second chances. The Day family had been a different story from the start. Marva Day, Charlene's mother, was a woman who measured worth in stock portfolios and country club memberships. She ran the family's crown jewel, the Heritage Inn, an exclusive boutique hotel in the Litchfield Hills that catered to wealthy New Yorkers seeking rustic Connecticut charm. It had been in the Day family for 3 generations, a sprawling estate of stone and timber that Marva guarded like a dragon protecting treasure. Greg Day, Charlene's father, was quieter but no less judgmental. He'd built his own wealth in commercial real estate and viewed Marshall's artisan work as quaint at best, poverty at worst. Never mind that Marshall's custom pieces sold for 5 figures and he had a 2-year waiting list. Then there was Trina, Charlene's younger sister, 28 and perpetually single. She worked as the Heritage Inn's event coordinator and spent most of her energy competing with Charlene for their mother's approval. Marshall had played nice with them all, had smiled through Marva's backhanded compliments about his charming little craft business, had ignored Greg's suggestions that he should think bigger and stop wasting his potential. He'd done it for Charlene, and because he'd hoped they'd come around. But they never warmed to Emily. It started subtle, Trina forgetting to include Emily in the cousin photos at family gatherings. Marva commenting that Emily was so serious and difficult compared to other children. Greg falling silent whenever Marshall talked about his daughter's accomplishments. Charlene had defended Emily at first, but her protests grew weaker as months passed, until they stopped altogether. The breaking point came 3 weeks before Christmas. Marshall had stopped by the Heritage Inn to drop off some custom pieces he'd made for the lobby, a favor for Charlene, who'd asked sweetly and promised it would help smooth things over with Mom. He'd spent 3 weeks creating floating shelves from reclaimed barnwood and a statement piece for the reception desk, worth at least $15,000 in materials and labor. He'd charged them cost. He'd found Marva in her office, and before he could announce himself, he'd heard her on the phone. Cannot believe she expects us to just accept that child at every function. It's awkward, Beatrice. The girl is so withdrawn, so strange. And Marshall, well, he tries, but he's not exactly our sort, is he? Charlene made a mistake marrying down, and we're all paying for it. Marshall had stood frozen in the hallway, his hands still full of carefully wrapped shelving. Christmas will be family only this year, Marva continued. Real family. I've told Charlene she can come, obviously, but the girl should stay home. It's better for everyone. These blended families are so complicated, and Emily just doesn't fit in with our traditions. Marshall had turned around and left without delivering the pieces. They were now in his workshop and would stay there. He told Charlene what he'd heard that night. She'd gone pale, had promised to talk to her mother, had sworn she didn't feel that way. But she'd also asked him not to make a scene and to let her handle it gently. 2 weeks later, Charlene sat him down with trembling hands and red-rimmed eyes. Marshall, I love you. You know I do. And Emily she's a sweet girl. But Mom has a point about Christmas. It's a very traditional day family celebration. Lots of old customs, and Emily doesn't really know everyone that well. And she does get quiet and withdrawn, and maybe it would be better, just this once, if it was just me and my family. You and Emily could have your own Christmas morning, and then I'd join you later, and... Marshall had listened to his wife, try to convince him that excluding his daughter from Christmas was reasonable. He'd watched her twist herself into knots, trying to make bigotry sound like logic. And he'd seen the truth he'd been avoiding for months. Charlene had chosen her family over Emily. Over him. She'd always been going to choose them. No, he'd said simply. Marshall, please just listen. I said no, Charlene. Emily is my daughter. She's 9 years old. She lost her mother. I'm not going to tell her she's not welcome at Christmas because your mother thinks she's strange. It's not like that. It's exactly like that. Marshall had stood up. You go to your family's Christmas if you want. Emily and I will have our own. Together. Charlene had cried. She'd pleaded. She'd accused him of being unreasonable, of not understanding family dynamics, of forcing her to choose. Marshall had listened to it all with growing clarity. This marriage was over. He'd married a mirage, a woman who'd performed love for his daughter, but never actually felt it. The following week crept by in cold silence. Charlene moved between house and her mother's like a ghost, avoiding eye contact, sleeping in the guest room. Emily noticed, but didn't ask questions. She'd gotten good at that. On Christmas Eve, Marshall woke to find Charlene's car already gone. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter. Gone to help Mom with preparations. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon. We can talk then. No mention of Emily. No Merry Christmas. Just an itinerary. Marshall crumpled the note and threw it away. Dad! Emily stood at the bottom of the stairs in her snowflake pajamas. Is Charlene going to be here for Christmas? Marshall knelt down to her level. No, kiddo. But you know what? That means we get to make our own traditions. Just you and me. What do you say we go get a tree? A real one. The biggest one they have left. Emily's face brightened slightly. Really? Charlene always said real trees were too messy. Well, Charlene's not here. Marshall smiled. And I happen to like messy. They spent Christmas Eve choosing a magnificent 7-foot Douglas fir, decorating it with ornaments Sarah had collected, and baking cookies that burned slightly, because neither of them were great bakers. Emily fell asleep on the couch during It's a Wonderful Life, and Marshall carried her to bed, tucking her rabbit beside her. He stayed up late, sipping whiskey in his workshop, staring at the custom pieces he'd made for the Heritage Inn. Pieces that had never been delivered. Pieces that represented hours of his time, his skill, his attempt to buy acceptance from people who would never give it. His phone buzzed. A text from Charlene. Merry Christmas Eve. Mom says you and Emily should come tomorrow. 4 p.m. Dinner at 6. It would mean a lot to the family. Marshall stared at the message. After everything, they expected him to show up, to bring Emily into that den of judgment and conditional love, to pretend everything was fine. He typed back, well, think about it. He wouldn't think about it at all. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold. Emily woke Marshall at 6, bouncing with excitement over the presents under the tree. carefully chosen gifts he'd been accumulating for months. A new bike, art supplies, books, a locket with Sarah's picture inside. They made pancakes together, laughing when Marshall flipped one onto the floor. They watched movies and played board games. Emily wore her new sweater and showed Marshall her drawings. It was, Marshall thought, a perfect day, simple and real and filled with love. At 3:30, Charlene called. "Where are you?" "Mom has the table set. Everyone's asking." "We're not coming," Marshall said. "What?" "Marshall, you said you'd think about it." "I did think about it. The answer's no. You're being childish. Mom extended an invitation to both of you. Emily is welcome now. Can't you just—" "Stop." Marshall cut her off. "I heard your mother on the phone, Charlene. I heard her say Emily wasn't welcome, that she's strange, that I'm married down. Now, she's changed her mind? Why? Because it looks bad? Because someone might ask questions?" Silence on the line. "Emily and I are having a good Christmas," Marshall continued, his voice steady. "We don't need to be tolerated by people who don't actually want us there. Marshall, please. I'm asking you to do this for me. For our marriage. Our marriage." Marshall laughed, and it sounded bitter even to his own ears. "Charlene, you chose them over Emily 2 weeks ago. You don't get to pretend that didn't happen. I was trying to keep the peace. You were trying to appease your mother. There's a difference." Marshall heard voices in the background. Marva's sharp tone, Greg's rumble. "Marshall, just come. We can work this out. We can talk about. Goodbye, Charlene. Merry Christmas." He ended the call. Emily looked up from her new book. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's perfect," Marshall said, and meant it. "How about we make hot chocolate and watch another movie? With marshmallows? As many as you want." They spent the rest of Christmas Day in comfortable peace, just the two of them. Marshall didn't answer when Charlene called again, or when Marva called, or when Trina sent a flurry of texts calling him selfish and difficult. He turned off his phone and focused on his daughter. That night, after Emily fell asleep, Marshall sat in his workshop and made a decision. He pulled out his laptop and began documenting everything. Every conversation with the Day family. Every slight against Emily. Every promise Charlene had broken. He organized files, saved emails, backed everything up. Then he started making other plans. The Days thought they'd won because he'd walked away quietly. They thought his silence meant capitulation. They were about to learn that Marshall French had simply been choosing his moment. The day after Christmas, Charlene came home to find Marshall packing her belongings. "What are you doing?" She stood in the bedroom doorway, still wearing her designer coat, her face pale. "Making it easier," Marshall said calmly, folding one of her sweaters. "You've been sleeping at the inn half the week anyway. This just makes it official. You're throwing me out? Over Christmas dinner. I'm not throwing you out. You can leave or stay. But if you stay, we need to have some very serious conversations about this marriage and what you actually want from it." Charlene's eyes filled with tears. "I want us to work. I want us to be a family." "Do you?" Marshall set down the sweater and looked at her directly. "Because from where I stand, you want me to pretend your family isn't cruel to my daughter. You want me to accept being looked down on, to let Emily be excluded and made to feel less than. You want me to be grateful they tolerate us at all. That's not fair. Life's not fair, Charlene." Emily learned that when her mother died. She shouldn't have to learn it from mine. The word hung between them. Mine, not ours. The truth they'd both been dancing around. "I never wanted to replace Sarah," Charlene whispered. "I know," Marshall said, and his voice softened slightly. "But you did want to be part of our lives. You said you loved Emily. You said you wanted to be a family. Were you lying? Or did you just not understand what that meant? I do love her. My mother, my family, they're important to me. I thought I could make everyone happy." "You can't make everyone happy when everyone wants different things. You have to choose." Marshall zipped up the suitcase. "So choose. Your family who thinks my daughter is an inconvenience? Or the family you married into?" Charlene stood there, tears streaming down her face, and said nothing. Her silence was the answer. "I'll have my lawyer draw up separation papers," Marshall said quietly. "Take whatever you need tonight. We can figure out the rest later." Charlene left with 2 suitcases and her jewelry box. She didn't ask to see Emily, didn't leave her a note, just walked out the door and drove back to the Heritage Inn back to her mother's approval and her family's comfortable prejudice. Marshall stood in the empty bedroom and felt nothing but relief. The week between Christmas and New Year's was strange and quiet. Emily asked about Charlene twice, and Marshall told her the truth in age-appropriate terms. Sometimes grown-ups realize they want different things. Charlene and I are going to live separately for a while. Emily had nodded seriously. Does this mean we don't have to go to those dinners anymore? No more dinners. Good. They were boring, and nobody ever talked to me anyway. Out of the mouths of babes. Marshall threw himself into work. He had 3 major projects lined up for the new year, including a full restoration of a Gilded Age library in Manhattan. He updated his schedule, confirmed meetings, checked in with his suppliers. On the 3rd day after Christmas, his friend Leandro Wells stopped by the workshop. Leandro was a contractor Marshall worked with frequently, a broad-shouldered man with shrewd eyes and a talent for seeing structural problems before they became disasters. Heard Charlene moved out. Leandro said without preamble. You okay? Better than okay, Marshall said honestly. Turns out I married her family's opinion of me more than I married her. Leandro snorted. The Day family. All money and no class. You know, I did some work at that another couple years back. Marva tried to short me 20% because I wouldn't let her cheap out on the foundation work. Woman's a piece of work. You're not wrong. Marshall paused, then asked, how's the undoing these days? Business-wise. Why do you ask? Curiosity. Leandro gave him a long look. It's struggling. They expanded too fast a few years ago, took out major loans to add that spa wing and renovate the old ballroom. Occupancy's down because there's newer, flashier places opening up in the area. They're surviving on their reputation, but reputation doesn't pay the bills forever. Interesting, Marshall murmured. Marshall. Leandro's voice carried a warning. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, Marshall said slowly, that I've spent 18 months doing favors for that family. Free design consultations. Introducing them to my contacts in the Preservation Society. Helping Greg with building permits. Never charge them full price for anything. And I'm thinking maybe it's time to stop. To stop? Or to do more than stop? Marshall smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. I'll let you know. After Leandro left, Marshall made some calls. To the Preservation Society, where he served on the board. To a few contacts in the State Historical Commission. To his lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Marsh who specialized in family law and had a reputation for thorough, creative work. Then he opened his filing cabinet and pulled out a folder he'd been keeping for months. Insurance documents, building permits, historical assessments, email chains, all related to the Heritage Inn. The Day family had no idea how much Marshall knew about their business, how many of their recent successes had come from his quiet intervention, his connections, his expertise. They saw him as Charlene's charming but slightly shabby husband, a craftsman who worked with his hands because he wasn't smart enough for real business. They were about to learn how wrong they were. On New Year's Eve, Marshall got the first call from Charlene. He let go to voicemail. She called again an hour later. Then Trina called. Then Marva. Marshall ignored them all. He was busy making pancakes with Emily and planning to watch the ball drop from the comfort of his couch. The calls kept coming. By midnight, he had 12 missed calls and a series of increasingly frantic texts. Marshall, please pick up, we need to talk. This is important. Call me back. Marshall, stop being childish. We have a serious situation. He turned off his phone and kissed Emily's forehead as she fell asleep in her new pajamas, exhausted from staying up late. The situation, he knew, was just beginning. The next morning, New Year's Day, Marshall turned on his phone to find 47 missed calls. 47. He smiled and made coffee. Then he called his lawyer. Patricia? Happy New Year. I need you to file those separation papers we discussed. And I need you to do something else for me. What's that? I need you to review a contract I'm about to break. Tell me exactly how much it's going to cost me. Marshall, what are you planning? I'm planning, he said, watching through the window as Emily played in the first snow of the year, safe and happy, to teach some people the cost of cruelty. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm listening. Marshall explained, and Patricia laughed, a sharp, delighted sound. You're diabolical, she said. I love it. Send me everything you have. Marshall hung up and poured another cup of coffee. His phone buzzed again. Another call from Marva. He declined it and blocked the number. They'd get their chance to talk, but it would be on his terms, in his time, after they'd learned what it felt like to be powerless and unwanted. For now, he had a daughter to raise, a business to run, and a very satisfying plan to execute. The days wanted his attention. They were about to get it. Emily came running in from the snow, cheeks pink and eyes bright. "Dad, can we build a fort?" Marshall set down his phone and pulled on his coat. "Absolutely. The biggest fort this yard has ever seen." As they worked together in the snow, packing and shaping, Marshall felt lighter than he had in months. Maybe years. The weight of trying to fit into the Day family's world, of making himself smaller to accommodate their judgment, was gone. He was done apologizing for being himself. Done letting people make his daughter feel unwanted. The Days thought they could exclude Emily and suffer no consequences. They thought Marshall would accept it, would keep playing nice, would keep propping up their failing business and their fragile egos. They had 47 missed calls because they were beginning to realize the truth. Marshall French didn't need them. He'd never needed them. But they were about to discover just how much they needed him. And by the time he was finished, they'd understand exactly what they'd lost when they told a 9-year-old girl she wasn't welcome at Christmas. On January 2nd, Marshall finally answered a call. Not from Charlene or Marva, but from Greg Day. "Marshall." Greg's voice was strained, formal. "We need to talk. In person. It's about the inn." "What about it?" "There's been a situation. The Historical Society has flagged some issues with our permits. Something about the renovations not being properly documented. We need your help sorting it out." Marshall smiled into the phone. "Do you now? Look, I know things have been tense with Charlene and everything else. But this is business. Professional. You've helped us navigate this kind of thing before." "I have," Marshall agreed. "And I charge you a fraction of my usual consulting rate because we were family. But we're not family anymore, Greg. You made that clear when you decided my daughter wasn't good enough for your Christmas table." Silence. "So here's what's going to happen." Marshall continued, his voice pleasant. "I'm going to focus on my own projects, my own clients, people who actually value my expertise and treat my daughter with respect. And you're going to figure out your permit issues on your own, or pay my full consulting rate, which is $3,000 a day, plus expenses." $3,000? Marshall, be reasonable. "I'm being reasonable. That's what I charge clients I'm not related to. You wanted me to be just business? Congratulations. This is business." Marshall hung up. The phone rang again immediately. He declined the call and went back to his workshop, where a beautiful piece of cherry wood was waiting to be transformed into something extraordinary. Let them panic. Let them scramble. Let them feel for once what it was like to need something they couldn't buy or bully their way into having. This was just the beginning, and Marshall French was a patient man. By the end of the first week of January, the calls had surpassed 100. Marshall answered none of them. His lawyer fielded several increasingly desperate messages from the Day's attorney about urgent business matters and misunderstandings that need clearing up. Patricia reported back with barely concealed glee. "They're in trouble, Marshall. Real trouble. Apparently, several of their permits are under review. They've lost their certification from some tourism board, and there's talk of the Historical Commission pulling their landmark status. They seem to think you can fix it." "I probably could," Marshall said. "If I wanted to." "Do you?" "Not even a little bit." "Good. Because I'd hate to see you waste your time on people who treated you and Emily like garbage. Speaking of which, the separation papers are ready. Do you want me to serve Charlene? Or do you want to do it yourself?" "Serve her. At the inn. During business hours." Patricia laughed. "You're cruel." "I approve." Marshall wasn't cruel. He was done being nice. There was a difference. On January 10th, Charlene showed up at his door. She looked terrible. Hair unwashed, makeup smeared, eyes red and swollen. "Marshall, please. You have to help us. The inn is falling apart. Mom is losing her mind. The permits, the certifications, the pleas. Just talk to them. Fix this." Marshall stood in the doorway, blocking her entry. Behind him, Emily was doing homework at the kitchen table, safe and warm and exactly where she belonged. "No," he said simply. "What do you mean, no?" "Marshall, this is my family's livelihood. 3 generations. 3 generations of looking down on people they think are beneath them. 3 generations of conditional love and cruelty dressed up as standards. No, Charlene. I'm done helping people who hurt my daughter. She's fine. Emily is fine. God, you're so dramatic. She's fine because I protected her. Because I took her away from your family's poison. And now you want me to save the same people who said she wasn't welcome at Christmas. Charlene's face crumpled. It was just one dinner. One stupid dinner. Why are you punishing all of us for that? It wasn't one dinner. Marshall's voice went quiet and hard. It was months of small cuts. Months of watching them exclude her, ignore her, make her feel less than. Months of you letting it happen because you didn't want to make waves. That dinner was just the last straw. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have stood up for her. I should have. Yes, you should have. But you didn't. And now you're here because you need something from me, not because you actually care about Emily or feel bad about what happened. That's not true. Really? When's the last time you asked about her? When's the last time you sent her a text or called to say hi? You called me 100 times this week about the inn. How many times have you called to check on your stepdaughter? Charlene stood there, mouth open, with no answer. That's what I thought. Go home, Charlene. Figure out your permit problems yourself. I'm busy. He closed the door in her face. Emily looked up from her homework. Was that Charlene? Yeah. Did she want to say hi to me? Marshall's heart broke and hardened at the same time. No, kiddo. She didn't. Emily went back to her math problems without another word, and Marshall wanted to put his fist through a wall. Instead, he called Patricia. The separation papers have been served? This morning. Charlene signed them. She's not contesting anything. Good. Now I need you to do something else. Remember those documents I sent you? About the inn's renovations? The ones where they cut corners on the structural work and falsified inspection reports. Those. Send them to the state building inspector, and the historical commission, and the insurance company. Marshall, Patricia said carefully, that's going to destroy them. I know. You're sure about this? Marshall thought about Emily's careful walls, about the way she'd learned to expect rejection, about Christmas morning when she'd asked if they had to go to those dinners anymore. I'm sure. They made their choice. Now they live with it. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. I'll send them tomorrow. The Day family is about to have a very bad week. Good, Marshall said, and meant it. The historical commission moved fast. By January 15th, the Heritage and received formal notice that their landmark status was under review due to significant structural alterations made without proper permits or oversight. The state building inspector followed up with citations for code violations. The insurance company sent a terse letter about fraudulent documentation and policy cancellation pending investigation. Marva Day called Marshall personally. You bastard. Her voice shook with rage. You're doing this on purpose. You're sabotaging us because your feelings got hurt. My feelings? Marshall laughed. Marva, this has nothing to do with my feelings. It has to do with the fact that you falsified inspection reports and did substandard renovation work to save money. I just made sure the right people knew about it. We'll sue you. For what? Telling the truth? Go ahead. Discovery should be fascinating. I'm sure the commission would love to hear about all the corners you cut, all the regulations you ignored. I've got documentation of every conversation where Greg bragged about getting around bureaucratic nonsense. Silence. You want to know what this is really about? Marshall continued. It's about consequences. You spent years treating people like they were disposable. You treated my daughter like she was less than human because she didn't fit your perfect picture. And you expected me to just take it because you're important and I'm just the craftsman who married up. This will destroy us. Good. Maybe you'll learn something. He hung up. The calls kept coming. Trina left a voicemail calling him every name in the book. Greg tried the reasonable approach, offering money, offering apologies, offering anything if Marshall would just make this go away. Marshall deleted every message without responding. Let them drown. Let them feel powerless. Let them understand, finally, what it was like to be dismissed and discarded by people who were supposed to care about you. Emily deserved that much. Sarah deserved that much. Marshall deserved that much. And the Days? They deserved exactly what they were getting. On January 20th, the Heritage Inn closed its doors. The Historical Commission had revoked their landmark status, the insurance company had canceled their policy, and the bank had called in their loans. Without the landmark designation, they couldn't maintain their high prices. Without insurance, they couldn't operate legally. Without restructuring their debt, they couldn't afford to stay open. 3 generations of family legacy, gone in 3 weeks. Charlene showed up at Marshall's door one last time. "You've won," she said flatly. "Is this what you wanted? My family is ruined. My mother is devastated. My father is talking about bankruptcy. Congratulations, Marshall. You destroyed us." Marshall looked at his soon-to-be ex-wife and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, no anger. Just emptiness where their marriage used to be. "I didn't destroy you, Charlene. I just stopped protecting you from yourselves. Everything that's happening now, that's because of choices your family made. Cutting corners on safety, falsifying documents, breaking regulations. I didn't make them do any of that. I just made sure the truth came out. You did it for revenge. I did it for Emily. And for every other person your family has looked down on and stepped on and treated like garbage. Your mother needed to learn that money and status don't make you better than other people. Your father needed to learn that rules exist for a reason. You needed to learn that you can't treat a child like an inconvenience and expect no consequences. Emily is fine. Marshall's temper finally broke. Emily will never be fine. She will spend the rest of her life wondering if she's good enough, if she's welcome, if she's too much or not enough. She will carry this with her because you and your family decided a 9-year-old who lost her mother wasn't worth basic human decency. So don't tell me Emily is fine. Don't you dare. Charlene took a step back, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have protected her. I should have chosen her." "Yes," Marshall said. "You should have. But you didn't. And now it's too late." Is it really too late? Could we try again? I'll do better. I'll stand up to my mother. No, Marshall said gently. "It's over, Charlene. We're done. You made your choice, and I've made mine. Sign the papers. Move on. Find someone whose daughter you don't have to learn to love." He closed the door for the last time. Inside, Emily was curled up on the couch with her rabbit, watching a movie. She looked up as Marshall entered. "Was that Charlene again?" "Yeah." "Is she going to keep coming back?" "No, sweetheart. I don't think so." "Good." Emily patted the couch next to her. "Will you watch with me?" Marshall sat down and pulled his daughter close. "I wouldn't be anywhere else." As the movie played, Marshall's phone buzzed with a final text from Marva Day. "I hope you're proud of yourself. You've destroyed everything we built." Marshall thought about Emily, safe in his arms. About the business he'd built with his own hands. About the life he was going to give his daughter, free from people who made her feel small. He typed back, "You destroyed yourselves. I just stopped cleaning up the mess." Then he blocked the number and turned off his phone. The Day family would have to rebuild from the ruins of their own making. Marshall and Emily would build something new, something better, something based on love instead of status, and acceptance instead of judgment. And for the first time since Sarah died, Marshall felt like he could breathe. 6 months later, Marshall stood in front of the old Heritage Inn property. It had been seized by the bank, sold at auction for a fraction of its worth. The building stood empty, windows dark, reputation destroyed. Leandro stood beside him, holding a set of blueprints. "You sure about this?" Leandro asked. Marshall smiled. "I'm sure." He'd bought the property through an LLC for pennies on the dollar. The Day family would never know he owned it, would never know their precious legacy was now his to reshape. He was going to restore it. Properly this time, with respect for the history and the craftsmanship. He was going to turn it into something Sarah would have loved, a community center, maybe a place where families could gather without judgment, where kids like Emily would always be welcome. The irony wasn't lost on him. The Days had excluded his daughter from their Christmas table. Now their family's greatest pride was his to do with as he pleased. "What are you going to call it?" Leandro asked. Marshall thought about it. About Sarah. About Emily. About second chances and new beginnings. "The Emily Rose Center," he said finally. "After my daughter." Leandro grinned. "Sarah would have loved that." "Yeah," Marshall agreed, feeling the weight of grief and hope mixing together. She really would have. His phone buzzed. A text from Emily. Dad, are you coming home soon? I want to show you my art project. Marshall typed back. On my way now, kiddo. Can't wait to see it. He took one last look at the building that had represented everything wrong with the Day family. Their pride, their prejudice, their downfall. Then he turned away and drove home to his daughter. The Days had taught him a valuable lesson. That cruelty has a price. That actions have consequences. And that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and building something better from the ashes. Emily was waiting on the porch when he arrived, holding up a painting she'd made in art class. It was their house, covered in snow, with two stick figures holding hands in front. It's us, she said proudly. On Christmas. I called it the best Christmas ever. Marshall picked her up and hugged her tight. It was, wasn't it? Yeah, Emily said, wrapping her arms around his neck. Because it was just us. Just us, Marshall echoed. The way it's supposed to be. As they walked inside together, Marshall glanced back at the street. No calls from the Days. No drama. No demands for his time or attention or expertise. Just peace. Just his daughter. Just the life they were building together. The Days had 47 missed calls because they'd lost something irreplaceable. Marshall's protection, his expertise, his goodwill. They'd gambled that he needed them more than they needed him. That his love for Charlene would make him accept anything. They'd been catastrophically wrong. And now Marshall French, the craftsman they'd dismissed, the man they'd looked down on, the father they'd tried to separate from his child, owned their legacy and was turning it into something beautiful, something that would welcome everyone, especially little girls who'd lost their mothers and just wanted to belong. Marshall closed the door on the past and walked into his kitchen, where Emily was already pulling out ingredients for dinner. Can we make cookies after? She asked. As many as you want, Marshall promised. And outside, in the gathering dusk, the world spun on, indifferent to the Day family's fall and perfectly content with Marshall French's victory. Because in the end, the best revenge wasn't destruction. It was taking everything they'd valued and making it better. It was proving that love and integrity mattered more than status and wealth. It was showing his daughter that good people don't have to accept cruelty, that she was worth protecting, and that sometimes the people who claim to be family are the ones you need to walk away from. The Days had their 47 missed calls. Marshall had his daughter. He'd made the right choice. And he'd do it again in a heartbeat. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. The laughter of children echoed through Giordano's Italian restaurant as Charles Kenna watched his son blow out 10 candles. Dane's face glowed in the warm light. His eyes squeezed shut as he made his wish. Around them, families celebrated. Waiters balanced trays of steaming pasta, and the aroma of garlic bread filled the air. It should have been perfect. Charles had built a good life. His architectural firm, Canta Designs, had just landed a $20 million contract for the new Riverside complex. His wife Valeria sat beside him, her perfectly manicured hand resting on the table, her phone buzzing with what she claimed were messages from her book club. Dane opened his eyes and grinned, and Charles felt a warmth spread through his chest. This was what mattered, family. I'll be right back, Valeria said, standing gracefully. Restroom. She kissed Dane's forehead and walked toward the back of the restaurant, her heels clicking against the tile floor. Charles was reaching for his water glass when he felt it, Dane's small hand gripping his wrist with surprising force. The boy's knuckles were white, his breathing shallow. Dad. Dane's voice cracked. We have to go. Now. Leave Mom here. Charles froze. What? Why? Buddy, what's wrong? Tears streamed down Dane's face, cutting through the remnants of chocolate frosting on his cheeks. Please, trust me. If we stay, something terrible will happen. The words hit Charles like a physical blow. His son, his logical, level-headed son who built complex Lego structures and solved puzzles meant for teenagers, was terrified. Dane, talk to me. Charles Cantu. The voice came from behind him, deep and official. Charles turned to see two men in dark suits, badges already out. Detective badges. Behind them stood three uniformed officers, and beyond them, near the kitchen entrance, he caught a glimpse of Valeria. She wasn't in the restroom. She was standing with a man Charles recognized, her brother, Christopher Mack, and another man he'd seen at their house once, Galen Hahn, Christopher's business partner. Valeria's face wasn't worried. It was cold, satisfied. Charles Cantu, the detective repeated. I'm Detective Morrison. We have a warrant for your arrest. The restaurant went silent. Charles felt every eye turned toward him. Arrest? For what? Fraud, embezzlement of client funds, and falsification of building permits. We have evidence that you've been running a scheme through your architectural firm, pocketing millions while cutting corners that have put dozens of buildings at risk. Charles's mind raced. That's insane. I've never. Dad. Dane's grip tightened. I heard them. In the study. 3 nights ago. Uncle Chris and that Galen man were talking with Mom. They said today at my party so everyone would see. So you'd look guilty. They said you'd never see it coming. Everything clicked into place. The late night business meetings Valeria had insisted Christopher needed to have at their house. The way she'd been insisting Charles sign documents quickly, don't bother reading them over the past months. The USB drive he'd found in his home office last week that Valeria claimed was for photos, but had required his business password to access. Charles looked at his son, this brave, brilliant boy who'd been carrying this terrible knowledge alone, waiting for the right moment to warn him. Then he looked at the detectives, at the handcuffs being pulled from a belt. Dane, Charles said quietly, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. Remember what I taught you about foundations? The boy nodded, confused but listening. The stronger the foundation, the taller you can build. And you, son, just gave me the foundation I need. Charles stood, not resisting as the detective approached. I'm going to cooperate fully, detective. But I'm also going to prove my innocence. Every single document, every permit, every bank transaction, I keep meticulous records. You'll have complete access. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, Charles caught Valeria's eye across the restaurant. She smiled. Actually smiled. Charles smiled back. Not a warm smile. A predator's smile. Dane, he said as they led him away, call Uncle Reuben. Tell him exactly what you told me. He'll know what to do. Reuben Farrell wasn't just Charles's best friend since college. He was an investigative journalist who'd made his career exposing corporate corruption and legal conspiracies. If anyone could unravel this quickly, it was Reuben. As a police car pulled away from Giordano's, Charles stared out the window at the city he'd helped build, literally. A dozen buildings bore his architectural signature. He designed the mayor's office renovation. He'd created the children's hospital expansion. He'd never cut a corner, never falsified a permit, never stolen a dime, which meant someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make it look like he had. 3 people, Valeria, Christopher, and Galen. A wife who'd shared his bed for 11 years. A brother-in-law he'd helped start his real estate investment company. And a man he barely knew, but who'd been circling his life like a shark for months. Charles closed his eyes and began building the structure in his mind. Not of a building, but of a plan. Architecture was about seeing the invisible, understanding how pieces fit together, knowing where stress points lay and how to exploit or reinforce them. He designed buildings that could withstand earthquakes. Now he designed their destruction. 24 hours in a holding cell gave Charles time to think. The concrete walls reminded him of his childhood, growing up in a Chicago housing project where his mother, Carolyn Cantu, worked 3 jobs to keep him fed and clothed. She died when he was 19, never seeing him graduate from Northwestern with honors, never seeing him build his empire. You've got good bones, she used to tell him, tapping his forehead. Use them to build something that lasts. At 10 a.m., Reuben Farrell walked into the interrogation room where they'd moved Charles. Reuben was a bear of a man, 6'3" with a gray beard and eyes that missed nothing. He carried a leather briefcase and wore his trademark rumpled blazer. They're claiming you've stolen $12 million over 18 months, Reuben said without preamble, sliding papers across the table. falsified inspection reports on 4 major buildings, including the Riverside complex, paid off inspectors, created a shell company to funnel money. Charles scanned the documents. They were good, sophisticated forgeries of his signatures, bank statements showing transfers to accounts he'd never opened, emails from his business account he'd never sent. Christopher Mack, Charles said. Tell me about him. Reuben pulled out a tablet. Valeria's older brother, 42, started a real estate investment firm called Mack Ventures 5 years ago with Galen Hahn. They've been moderately successful, bought distressed properties, renovated, flipped. Nothing spectacular. Until recently, 6 months ago, they put a bid on a massive development project, the Harborview District. $200 million project. Mixed use, residential, commercial, the works. They were competing against 3 other firms, including 2 major national developers. Reuben paused. They lost. The contract went to Riverside Development Group, who hired me to design the Riverside complex. Charles finished. Exactly. And if Riverside Development Group's lead architect gets arrested for fraud, falsifying permits, and making buildings unsafe, Reuben spread his hands. The contract gets terminated. Everything goes out for rebid. Charles leaned back, and Mack Ventures slides in with a lower bid, claiming they can fix the problems I supposedly created. There's more. I did some digging on Galen Hahn. He's got connections to a city councilman, Parker Humphrey, who sits on the development approval board. Humphrey's been pushing for ethical oversight of major projects, conveniently right as this case breaks. So they frame me, take my contract, and position themselves as the heroes who'll clean up my mess. Charles felt the familiar focus settling over him, the same feeling he got when solving a complex structural problem. What about Valeria? Reuben's expression darkened. I talked to Dane. Your boy's sharp, Charles. He recorded the conversation he overheard. What? On his tablet. He was doing homework in the room next to your study. Heard raised voices and hit record on a whim. Smart kid. Reuben pulled out a small device. I had it enhanced. You want to hear this? He pressed play. Christopher's voice crackled through the speaker. Can't back out now, Val. We've invested too much. The forgeries are perfect. I've got Morrison paid off to make the arrest public. Embarrassing. Charles will be ruined. He doesn't deserve this. That was Valeria, but her voice was uncertain, not defiant. He doesn't deserve it? Galen Hahn's voice was sharp, cruel. Your husband is sitting on a gold mine and doesn't even realize it. That Riverside contract alone is worth $40 million in fees over 3 years. And he keeps turning down lucrative projects because they don't meet his ethical standards. The mockery in his voice was clear. Meanwhile, we're drowning in debt because Christopher convinced me to expand too fast. Galen's right, Christopher said. Besides, you'll get half in the divorce. And with Charles in prison, you'll get full custody of Dane. We'll be family again, Val. Like it should be. Silence. Then Valeria. When? His birthday party. Public. Humiliating. He won't see it coming. The recording ended. Charles sat motionless. She knew. Every step. There's something else. Reuben pulled out another document. The shell company they created in your name? It's real. They've actually been moving money through it, but not your money. Theirs. Money they borrowed from some very unpleasant people to fund their expansion. They needed a fall guy, and you were it. Who did they borrow from? Offshore investors, legitimate on paper. But I have a source who says the money came from a man named Bernardo Norton. He runs a private equity firm that's been investigated multiple times for predatory lending and alleged connections to organized crime. Nothing ever sticks, but the rumor mill says crossing Norton is a bad idea. Charles absorbed this. So Christopher and Galen borrowed millions they couldn't repay, decided to frame me to steal my contracts and money, brought Valeria in on it, and now they owe money to dangerous people. That's the shape of it. How long do I have before they push this to trial? Morrison's being paid to move fast. Preliminary hearing in 3 days. With the fabricated evidence, you could be looking at formal charges by next week. Charles stood, pacing the small room. I need you to do something for me. Find out everything about Galen Hahn's and Christopher's financials. Every loan, every debt, every investor. I want to know who they owe, how much, and what the terms are. What are you thinking? That the best revenge isn't proving them wrong. Charles turned, and Reuben saw something in his friend's eyes he'd never seen before, something cold and calculating. It's proving them right in a way that destroys them. Charles's lawyer, Jeffrey Wade, was a shark in a Brooks Brothers suit. He specialized in white-collar defense and had a reputation for dismantling prosecutors' cases with surgical precision. He got Charles released on bail within 6 hours. They've got circumstantial evidence, Jeffrey explained in his office later that evening. Compelling, but circumstantial. The signatures are forgeries, good ones, but forgeries. The bank accounts were opened with stolen identity information. I can create reasonable doubt, but it'll be messy and expensive. I don't want reasonable doubt, Charles said. I want complete exoneration, and I want them destroyed. Jeffrey raised an eyebrow. Careful with language like that. I mean legally destroyed, Charles clarified, though his tone suggested otherwise. He left Jeffrey's office and drove to a small house in the suburbs where Reuben had taken Dane. His son ran to him, and Charles held him tight, feeling the boy's heart hammering against his chest. I'm sorry, Dad. I should have told you sooner. You did exactly right, Charles said firmly. You were brave, smart, and you saved me from walking into a trap unprepared. I'm proud of you. Dane pulled back, wiping his eyes. What happens now? Now we show them what happens when you underestimate a Cantu. Over the next 48 hours, Charles worked with the intensity that had made him successful. He barely slept, surviving on coffee and the kind of focused determination that came from righteous anger. Reuben delivered financial records that painted a damning picture. Mac Ventures was hemorrhaging money. They borrowed $8 million from Norton's equity firm at 20% interest, due in full within 6 months. That deadline was 3 weeks away. They'd been counting on stealing the Riverside contract to pay it off. But there was more. Galen Hahn had a gambling problem, high-stakes poker games where he'd lost another $2 million. Christopher had been falsifying Mac Ventures' financial statements to hide their losses from investors. And Valeria? She'd been transferring money from their joint accounts for months, small amounts that Charles had never noticed, building herself a nest egg for the divorce as she'd been planning. They're desperate, Reuben said, spreading the documents across Charles's kitchen table. Desperate people make mistakes. Then let's give them enough rope, Charles replied. He made a phone call to an old friend, Romeo Crosby, a structural engineer who'd worked with Charles on a dozen projects. Romeo owed Charles his career. Charles had vouched for him when a previous employer tried to blacklist him over a false safety complaint. I need you to inspect the buildings they're claiming I falsified permits for, Charles said. Full structural analysis. Every beam, every joint, every system. You got it. When do you need it? Yesterday. Romeo worked through 2 nights. His report was comprehensive and damning, not for Charles, but for the accusations. Every building was not just safe, but exceeded code requirements. The inspection reports Charles had supposedly falsified, they were actually more stringent than required. There's no fraud here, Romeo said, handing over his findings. These are some of the safest structures in the city. Whoever fabricated this case didn't understand what they were looking at. Charles smiled grimly. Because they're real estate investors, not architects. They don't understand the difference between cutting corners and optimizing design. The next move came from an unexpected source, Dane. Dad, his son, said one evening, I've been thinking about what Uncle Chris said on the recording. About them being family again. Mom's been weird with Uncle Chris for a long time. Remember last year at Thanksgiving? Charles did remember. Valeria and Christopher had spent hours in hushed conversation, and when Charles asked about it, she claimed they were discussing their late father's estate. What about it? Mom got really upset when Uncle Chris brought a girlfriend. Like really upset, and the girlfriend never came around again. Charles felt something click in his mind. He pulled out his phone and called Reuben. I need you to look into Valeria and Christopher's relationship. Something deeper than sibling bonds. Reuben was quiet for a moment. You think? I think we need to know everything. What Reuben discovered 2 days later made Charles's blood run cold. Valeria and Christopher weren't just siblings. Their relationship had crossed boundaries years ago, before Charles had even met Valeria. There were hotel receipts, credit card statements for jewelry and gifts, text messages recovered from old phone records that Ruben's contacts in the tech world had unearthed. "It stopped when she met you," Ruben said carefully. "At least, it appeared to. But 6 months ago, around the time Mac Ventures was circling the drain, it started up again." "So she was never really mine," Charles said quietly. "No, she was always his. You were just convenient, stable, respectable, someone to give her the life Christopher couldn't provide." Charles felt something break and reform inside him, harder and sharper than before. "Then let's give them what they really want," he said. "Each other, with nothing else left." The preliminary hearing was a spectacle. The prosecution, led by an ambitious district attorney named Stella Stevenson, laid out their case with dramatic flair. Fabricated evidence, forged signatures, shell companies. It all sounded damning until Jeffrey Wade stood up. "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce an independent structural analysis conducted by Romeo Crosby, a licensed engineer with 20 years of experience." Jeffrey slid the report to the judge. "Every building my client allegedly compromised is not only safe but exceeds all code requirements." Stella's face tightened. "The falsified permits are actually more stringent than required. Unless the prosecution is arguing that my client committed fraud by making buildings too safe." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Charles sat calmly, his eyes finding Valeria in the gallery. She sat with Christopher, their shoulders touching. Galen Hahn sat 2 rows behind them, looking increasingly uncomfortable. The judge reviewed the report. "Ms. Stevenson, do you have evidence that any of these structures are actually unsafe?" "Your Honor, the financial records." "Answer the question. Are the buildings unsafe?" Stella hesitated. "We have expert testimony that," which I assume was provided by someone with a vested interest in this case. Jeffrey interrupted smoothly. "Your Honor, I have the actual city inspection records, signed and dated by official inspectors who are willing to testify. All buildings passed with flying colors." The judge looked annoyed. "Ms. Stevenson, I'm not dismissing the charges yet, but you'd better have more than circumstantial evidence. I'm giving you 2 weeks to shore up your case. Mr. Cantu, you remain free on bail." As they filed out of the courtroom, Charles deliberately walked past Valeria and Christopher. "Nice try," he said quietly just for them. "But you forgot something important." "What's that?" Christopher sneered. "I'm better at this than you." That evening, Charles made his first real move. He called Bernardo Norton. "Mr. Norton, my name is Charles Cantu. I believe you have a business relationship with Mac Ventures." There was a pause on the other end. "I know who you are, Mr. Cantu. I've been following your legal troubles with interest." "Then you know I'm being framed." "I suspected as much. Christopher Mack doesn't strike me as a man who plans things well. He's impulsive, desperate. Those are dangerous qualities in a debtor. He owes you $8 million, due in 3 weeks. You're well informed." "I'm an architect, Mr. Norton. I build things, but I also understand demolition. I have a proposition for you." 20 minutes later, Charles hung up with a smile. The next phase of Charles's plan required precision timing. He met with Parker Humphrey, the city councilman Galen had been cultivating at a coffee shop downtown. "Mr. Humphrey, thank you for meeting with me." Parker was a nervous man in his 50s, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm not sure this is appropriate, Mr. Cantu, given the pending charges." "I know Galen Hahn has been funding your campaign," Charles said bluntly. "I know he's promised you kickbacks if Mac Ventures gets the Harbor View contract. And I know you pushed for the ethical oversight measure specifically to create leverage against me." Parker's face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Charles slid a folder across the table. "That's documentation of every payment, every promise, every illegal conversation. My friend Ruben Farrell is an excellent investigative journalist. This is all going to come out, Councilman. The only question is whether you're going down with them or making a deal." "A deal." "Testify about their scheme. Confirm that Galen and Christopher orchestrated this to steal the Riverside contract. In exchange, I'll keep your involvement minimal in my reporting. You'll face consequences, but they won't destroy your life." Parker stared at the folder, his hands shaking. "If I do this, Galen will." Galen will be too busy trying to save himself. Right now, his organization is collapsing. Bernardo Norton is calling in his loan early. Galen doesn't have the money. In 3 days, Norton will take everything. The company, the properties, everything. Unless Galen can find $8 million. How do you know Norton will? Because I convinced him to. Norton doesn't care about revenge. He cares about money and order. I offered him something better than waiting 3 weeks for 2 desperate men to potentially disappear or declare bankruptcy. I offered him Christopher and Galen gift-wrapped. Parker looked sick. You planned all this? They try to destroy my life and take my son from me, Charles said, his voice cold. This is me being merciful. Parker signed the affidavit that afternoon. Meanwhile, Rubin published the first article. City councilman implicated in development corruption scheme. It was trending within hours. Parker Humphrey's office was flooded with calls for his resignation. The city council announced an emergency investigation. Galen Hahn's phone rang off the hook. Investors started demanding their money back. The bank froze Mac Ventures accounts pending investigation. Charles watched it unfold from his home office. Dana asleep in the room next door, protected and safe. His phone rang. Valeria. Charles, we need to talk. No, we don't. Please. I made a mistake. I can fix this. Fix this? Valeria, you tried to send me to prison. You tried to take my son from me. You were planning to divorce me and take half of everything while I rotted in a cell for crimes I didn't commit. Her voice cracked. Christopher convinced me. Christopher? The brother you've been sleeping with since before we met. Silence. I know everything, Valeria. Every hotel room, every lie, every betrayal. Did you ever love me? Or was I just the respectable facade while you maintained your sick relationship with your brother? It's not like that. Then what's it like? Enlighten me. He's my family. He needed help. The business was failing, and I couldn't just. So you destroyed me instead. Your husband, the father of a child. Charles, please. If this goes public, if people find out about Christopher and me. Oh, it's going public. Tomorrow morning. Rubin's already written the article. Incestuous affair at heart of fraud scheme. It'll be everywhere. No, Charles, you can't. Watch me. He hung up. The article dropped at 6 a.m. By 8 a.m., it was the top story in the city. By noon, it had gone national. The details were damning. Valeria and Christopher's inappropriate relationship, the financial desperation, the elaborate frame job against Charles, Parker Humphrey's involvement, Galen's gambling debts. Rubin had documented everything meticulously, with bank records, text messages, and witness testimony. Charles's phone exploded with calls from supporters, former clients, colleagues expressing outrage on his behalf. The narrative had completely shifted. He wasn't the villain anymore. He was the victim, a hardworking architect betrayed by his own family. The district attorney's office quietly moved to drop all charges. But Charles wasn't done. At 2 p.m., Bernardo Norton's collection team showed up at Mac Ventures' office. They weren't police. Norton operated in gray areas of the law. They were professional, efficient, and merciless. They seized everything: computers, files, property deeds, keys to every building Mac Ventures owned. Galen Hahn tried to run. He made it to his car before 2 of Norton's men blocked him in. Charles watched from across the street as they had a short, intense conversation. Galen's face went from red to white in seconds. Christopher Mack was found 6 hours later in a hotel room, drunk and barely conscious. Norton's men dragged him to a warehouse Norton owned. Charles received a phone call at 9 p.m. Mr. Cantu, your friends are here. Would you like to have a conversation with them? Charles drove to the warehouse. It was empty except for Norton, 2 of his associates, and Christopher and Galen tied to chairs in the center of the floor. Both men looked terrified. Gentlemen, Norton said conversationally, Mr. Cantu has made me an interesting offer. Since you can't pay what you owe, he's offered to cover your debt, all $8 million, in exchange for certain assurances. Galen's eyes widened. Charles, please. Shut up, Charles said flatly. He walked closer, his footsteps echoing. You tried to destroy me. You involved my wife, framed me for crimes I didn't commit, and tried to take my son from me. Why? The business was failing. Christopher said desperately. You needed money, so you decided to ruin someone else's life? That's your justification? We thought, we thought you'd survive. You're talented, you'd rebuild. I would have been a convicted felon. I would have lost my son, my career, everything I built. My mother worked herself to death to give me a chance at a better life. And you tried to erase all of that because you made bad business decisions? Charles leaned down until he was eye level with Christopher. And you've been sleeping with your sister since she was 18. You convinced her to marry me, so you could keep using her while having access to my money and connections. You're a parasite. Charles straightened and turned to Norton. The deal stands. $8 million to clear their debt. In exchange, I want legal documents transferring all of Mac Ventures' assets to me. Every property, every contract, every asset. They walk away with nothing but their lives. Done, Norton said. No. Galen struggled against his restraints. Those properties are worth $15 million at least. Not anymore, Charles said. Norton's collection efforts have spooked every investor and client you had. The properties are toxic now. In receivership, they might sell for $8 million total, barely covering the debt. But if I take them and rehabilitate the reputation, invest in improvements, they might be worth something again. Norton gets his money immediately. You two get to walk away instead of disappearing into whatever hole Norton had planned for defaulters. Norton smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. Mr. Cantu is being generous. In my usual business model, debts like yours are paid in other ways. Christopher and Galen signed the papers. The divorce was brutal and public. Valeria tried to fight for custody of Dane, but Dane himself testified, calmly, clearly, with the recording and his own observations, about what he'd witnessed. The judge awarded Charles full custody, with Valeria receiving supervised visitation only. You used our son's birthday party to try to destroy me, Charles said to her outside the courthouse. You don't deserve to be called a mother. Valeria looked broken. Her relationship with Christopher was now public knowledge. Her family had disowned her. Her friends had abandoned her. She'd lost everything. Her husband, her son, her reputation. I was weak, she said quietly. Christopher, he's been in my life since I was a child. He convinced me. He manipulated you. And you let him. Because it was easier than being strong. I know you hate me. I don't hate you, Valeria. I pity you. You had a good life, a son who loved you, a husband who would have given you anything. And you threw it all away for a fantasy that was never real. He walked away, Dane's hand in his. The next move came a week later. Charles had acquired all of Mac Ventures' properties. The first thing he did was hire a full team of investigators to audit every building. What they found was stunning. Christopher and Galen had actually been cutting corners on their properties. Bad contractors, cheap materials, falsified inspections. All the things they'd accused Charles of doing. 3 of these buildings are seriously unsafe, Romeo Crosby reported. This apartment complex has faulty electrical that could start fires. This commercial building has a roof that could collapse in heavy snow. And this one, he pointed to a residential property, has mold issues so severe it should be condemned. Charles called a press conference. When I acquired these properties from Mac Ventures, I discovered systematic safety violations. These are the same men who accused me of falsifying permits while they were actually putting people's lives at risk. He presented the evidence. I'm immediately closing these buildings for repairs and offering full refunds or relocations to any affected tenants. This will cost me millions, but safety comes first. The story exploded. Christopher and Galen went from fraudsters to criminally negligent. The city launched a criminal investigation. Former tenants filed lawsuits. The FBI started looking into whether federal laws had been broken. Christopher Mack and Galen Hahn were arrested 2 weeks later. The trial was swift. With Parker Humphrey's testimony, the forged documents Charles's team had uncovered, and the evidence of Mac Ventures' actual fraud, the prosecution had an airtight case. Christopher took a plea deal, 15 years for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Galen refused to plea and went to trial. The jury found him guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 20 years. Charles sat in the courtroom as the verdicts were read. He felt no joy, only a cold satisfaction. Justice, not revenge. But he still had one more move. Valeria had moved into a small apartment across town, working as a receptionist at a dental office. Her life had been reduced to poverty and isolation. She called Charles occasionally, begging to see Dane outside supervised visits, begging for forgiveness. He met her at a coffee shop one last time. "I want you to understand something," Charles said. "Dane asked me if I could forgive you. He's 10 years old and has more emotional maturity than you ever showed. He wants his mother back." Valeria's eyes filled with tears. "Charles, please. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for him. He needs to see that people can change, that redemption is possible." Charles slid papers across the table. "These are the conditions. You enter therapy. You cut all contact with Christopher. He's not allowed visitors anyway. But when he gets out, you stay away. You get a real job and rebuild your life. You prove over the next year that you could be a stable presence. And then we'll discuss unsupervised visitation. Eventually, shared custody if you prove you've actually changed. But Valeria, if you slip even once, if you lie or manipulate or try anything, I will make sure you never see Dane again. Do you understand?" She nodded, sobbing. "Thank you. Charles, thank you. Don't thank me. Thank your son. He's the one who asked me to give you a chance. Be worthy of him." 1 year later, Charles stood in his office overlooking the city. The Riverside complex was nearly complete, a gleaming testament to architectural excellence and structural integrity. His firm had gained 3 new major contracts in the wake of the scandal, with clients specifically requesting his services because of his reputation for ethics and quality. Dane was thriving. Straight-A student, happy, well-adjusted. He saw his mother every other weekend now. And while the relationship was still healing, there was progress. Valeria had actually kept her word. Therapy, stable job, no contact with Christopher. Reuben Farrell had won a journalism award for his coverage of the case. The series had exposed corruption throughout the city's development process, leading to reforms and several other investigations. Romeo Crosby's firm had expanded after the publicity from his structural analysis. He and Charles were partners on 2 new projects. The properties Charles had acquired from Mac Ventures, after massive renovations and proper oversight, they were now safe, profitable, and had actually increased in value. Charles had donated the profit from the first year to a charity supporting children of incarcerated parents. Bernardo Norton had sent Charles a bottle of very expensive whiskey with a note, "For solving my problem elegantly. Should you ever need certain resources, I am in your debt." Charles had put the bottle away unopened. He didn't need Norton's resources. He'd proven something more important, that intelligence, preparation, and unwavering principles could defeat desperation and corruption. His phone buzzed. "Dane, Dad, can we get pizza for dinner? Mom's asking if she can join us." Charles looked at the photo on his desk. Him and Dane at the last birthday party, both of them laughing, free from the darkness that had almost consumed them. "Sure, buddy. Tell her 6 o'clock. Love you, Dad. Love you too, son." Charles ended the call and turned back to his drafting table, where blueprints for a new children's hospital expansion were spread out. The building would be beautiful, functional, and absolutely safe. Every calculation perfect, every detail attended to, every corner reinforced. Just like his life, he'd been tested by betrayal, almost destroyed by lies, and forced to descend into darker methods than he'd preferred. But he'd emerged stronger, his foundation unshaken, his principles intact where it mattered most. The architect had built more than buildings. He'd built justice. He'd built redemption. He'd built a future for his son. And that was the only structure that truly mattered. As the sun set over the city he'd helped shape, Charles Kenna picked up his pencil and continued to design, one line at a time, the next chapter of his life. The foundation was solid. The structure would stand. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.